Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Confidential Live. I'm Kyler Cheatham, honored to be your host today. If this is your first time with us, first off, welcome and thank you so much for joining. If you've been here before, we're happy to see you again. These are our Friday conversations where we take kind of an informal look at what we're actually seeing with our real client work or what's happening in the industry. And so today we're really diving in around what does it look like to embrace kind of your legacy technology. And we'll take a few different threads that we'll pull on from that. And before I kind of pose this question or this topic to Adam and let him introduce himself, I just want to remind you that this conversation has, very little to do with us actually, and more to do with having a conversation in the industry because it's very confusing with all of the noise, especially that upgrade pressure or that new SaaS system pressure to have a healthy business. I think it's really important to have that conversation amongst ourselves because what we say might not be best for your business. And it's your job to be able to kind of discover what path that looks like, which is really difficult to do, again, with kind of this high pressure conversation. So, with that, I invite you to put your answers, your questions in the comments. And we usually, we'll start out the first kind of 15 minutes here talking about what we think and then go into a lot of your questions. So thank you so much again for joining us and let's get into it, Adam. So tell us a little bit about legacy technology. I think it's, as always, I think it's helpful to define it right before we get into it because that doesn't necessarily mean you're not going to utilize an upgrade with your legacy system. You're not going to create expansions around it. That doesn't necessarily mean that. So give us just a baseline definition to build on.
Yeah, well, for starters, for those of you who are joining, my name is Adam Cheatham. I'm the CEO of Confidential. Really appreciate all of the audience questions and activities in general. So thanks, appreciate that, Mick. I like the hat too. We've got a couple of them that I'm excited about. It's fun to be able to wear the hat and the stickers right here. So we have those too. If we're talking about legacy software systems, so there are a couple of ways that you got to peel this apart. But from a perspective of what is a legacy system, the legacy system is the system that you're using today, right? It may be ERP, it may be CRM, it may be warehouse management, whatever. That's your legacy system. That's what you've been on for quite some time. And as we start to talk about what the conversation looks like when we consider the value of our legacy systems, you start to figure out where their limitations are, and that usually becomes the sticking point on the conversation for we need a new system, right? Our system can't do this, our system can't do that, and people start saying we need to replace it, and so we need to replace our legacy system. That's where the conversation comes in. But a lot of what we'll talk about today is, what does that conversation actually look like, and how often can you actually do better if you take a closer look at what you have available in your legacy software environments, right? So there are a number of different ways of looking at it. There are folks who have the opportunity to modify their existing legacy systems because they own the source code. They have perpetual on-prem licenses, which don't exist anymore for the most part, especially as it pertains to the more enterprise level systems. You're buying into SaaS-based software that you have a lot less um, influence even over what gets built, as opposed to a lot more flexibility with the legacy system that you own the source code on, where you can build it yourself. So there's that piece of it. There's the option for things like bolt-ons, like most of my legacy system works just fine, but I have this one major hole. There's that piece of it from a bolt-on packages that you buy on the marketplace. And there are a lot of folks that even custom code their own applications outside the system. And there are a lot of different ways of looking at the software that you have today and what you can do with it to be able to get more out of it before you do switch. Because at the end of the day, um, if you're going to switch software systems and it's at the enterprise level, um, there are very few scenarios where you're not looking at a 12 to 18 month program, if not more, and making zero changes to your existing system over the next year to year and a half is usually not palatable to folks.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that, I mean, there's so much built up in that. And a lot of times when people come to us, they're super excited to talk about their new technology. And we're pumped too, right? Like that's an exciting piece. But I think a lot of people confuse new with necessary, right? And in order to be a mature, healthy business, I think that's a big piece that people think they need to buy SaaS systems, or maybe even if they have a SaaS system, a new different type of that, especially with the rise of kind of this hype buying in AI. So what are some kind of grounding questions that you ask to say, to see, like, are we actually needing new technology, or what is the issue in which they're doing that, especially when you have a team that's really kind of hyped up about new software?
Yeah, well, I think that one of the key components to that, and I like this comment from Mick, where did the legacy systems still outperform new software? People often confuse new with better, right? That's not always the case. And in a lot of scenarios, you ask people who tried to go live and failed, whether or not what they're going through right now, if they get through it in the next 6 months or more, if it was worth changing. And they would say, absolutely not. I couldn't get back to the old system fast enough. It did exactly what we wanted it to do. It just didn't feel like we could grow with it.
Hmm.
And, at the end of the day, you've been growing with it for quite some time. Why is it all of a sudden
Yeah.
unable to grow, right? So when I think about it that way, how do I determine whether or not I need to replace my existing legacy system? You had to ask the questions of what are the pain points that I'm having with it, and how do I solve them? Right? Is the only way to solve these pain points with a new system. And a great example of one of those things that would be a new system oriented thing, as opposed that would make it clear the legacy software system isn't going to work, is actually not functionality based at all.
Hmm.
It's we are the type of organization that strategically we want to attract young talent, and the young talent these days doesn't know what a green screen is, and if they can't use a mouse to click through things, they're gonna quit. It's just that way, right? We cannot sustain our business on the workforce that we have right now maintaining this system, and that's different, right? That's different than it doesn't work,
Yeah.
right? There are
That's
also
such a good
the
point.
I
Yeah.
have a set of licensing that is dependent on a specific type of hardware that they don't make anymore.
Hmm.
You can't buy, can't get new licenses that are compatible with a different set of hardware. And now I am attached to this one that, frankly, buying more servers off of eBay is not a sustainable path, right? So, all right, so now we do have a problem, right? But that still doesn't mean that we can't find other creative ways of migrating that prevent us from having to get into a new system. So when we start thinking about why, you really have to do your analysis, and it can't feel like
Hmm.
an emotional answer. It has to be
Yeah.
based in business logic, right? We can't keep our workforce. Uh, our turnover on young talent in particular is not acceptable to our leadership. And one of our key strategies for retaining talent based on our exit interviews is to update our systems because nobody
Hmm.
wants to use this old green screen technology. It doesn't work. All right. I get that. Now, if we want to bring it back to the functional conversation,
Hmm.
there does come a point too where an existing software may not be modifiable. Uh, we've put in so many customizations that we can't maintain the ones we have, let alone add new ones, right? So now we can't grow. Now um, we can't create the reports that we need to be able to add this new line of business. There
Hmm.
are certain scenarios where we have literally run out of customer data. Like we can't build any new customers. because of data constrictions, right? Like we aren't able to,
Yeah.
we have exhausted the maximum number. That's a terrible scenario, right? There's a
Absolutely.
functional need that system no longer works. So those are the bits and pieces of it that start to get, for me, to be more interesting conversations. Because at the end of the day, if it's I just hate the way that it looks when I log into it in the mornings. Like that's not a good enough reason
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
spend the money on a new system because um, there aren't very many people these days that are switching from one SaaS-based system to another,
Hmm.
and which means inherently that most folks are switching from an on-prem legacy system to a SaaS-based system that is a significant cost increase over time, right?
Hmm.
If you compare the 5-year total cost of ownership of a previous um, legacy on-prem scenario versus a SaaS-based scenario, you're probably pretty close. But after that, the difference in cost starts to escalate, right?
Hmm.
The fact that I'm only paying licenses, I'm not paying for licenses anymore. I'm only paying maintenance fees, which are a fraction of the original license fees that I paid. That lower cost is
Hmm.
long term a differentiator,
Yeah.
whereas the subscription cost is not only higher but will continue to increase over time. And it makes the problem escalate also because these days when you change into a SaaS-based software, yeah, there's the we'll never have to change again. But there's also and we'll make it so that it is so price prohibitive that you won't be able to change again because what
Yeah.
will happen is you'll be paying our subscription licenses while you're also trying to implement a new software system and you'll be paying their subscription licenses and the implementation fees on top of that. So
Hmm.
now we have a major problem with redundancy of licensing and stuff like that that I think is certainly gonna one day get folks who outgrow their ERP in a SaaS-based perspective in a bit of hot water with their thought process of why now I need to get into something bigger and I can't afford to do it because my licenses continue to go up on this other one, but I can't afford not to because I've outgrown it.
Hmm. Definitely. I think that there's so much to be said in that conversation. If you're going through this conversation or this process in a business, definitely rewatch that and pull. I mean, I took notes, right? And I sit right next to Adam all the time, so it's something that is so critical to understand all of those pieces, right? The sub fees of not being able to switch, right? The understanding what your issue is, not what your vendor wants it to be, right? But what is your problem that you're trying to solve? Not my vendor called me and gave me a screaming deal on this new SaaS platform. And I want to do that. So, what is actually the problem? And that needs to be an internal conversation supported by people that are not trying to sell you any sort of system in any way, right? So
Yeah.
those are big pieces. I love this question over here on LinkedIn, just that says, when teams say our system can't do X, right? Fill in the blank. How often is that a true product limitation versus a misunderstanding of what's already there?
So this is generally a bigger problem when the system is newer, right? Five
Mhm.
years, but we've been in it 5 years, or I have a user who hasn't been in it for a long time. So from a perspective of our system can't do X, that's usually the case when we have a team that doesn't understand the software system as it's been built because they haven't had the experience with it. Because usually what happens is you build it for yourself because you're the user and your IT team builds it for you because of what you asked. So you kind of have a history of what's been built into it. So a lot of times when it's somebody tenured that's been the owner of their business process in that system for a long time, um, when they say our system can't do this, that's generally often true. Now, the misunderstanding in this is less oriented towards I have a system that can't do this, but the functionality is in it. Um, it's usually more oriented towards the I have a system that can't do this, and the reason that it can't is because we haven't built it yet. And the reason that we haven't built it yet is because we have a long list of priorities. And this item is not on that list at a sufficient level that it gets done, right? That's actually working as designed.
Mm-hmm.
That's the business saying, no, our system can't do this. It is a product limitation, and we have not sufficiently prioritized it to do that. Now, that starts to snowball though, and it starts to build up over time. You get a backlog of things, of enhancements that don't get built, and then you end up with a real problem of now, if we were to dedicate the resources to building to knocking out this backlog,
Mm-hmm.
would that take us more time or less time than a new
Mm-hmm.
system? And would that cost us more or less money than a new system as it pertains to the resources? So there's a bit of a stacking effect on that over
Yeah.
time. I've been asking for this forever. Okay, well, if you've been asking it for that long, that means that over the last 5 years, nobody in your leadership team has thought that it was important enough to knock
Mm-hmm.
it out. This it sucks to hear that out loud, but
Yeah.
it's what you want, right? Like,
Absolutely. Yeah.
oh well,
Yeah.
we just haven't prioritized that over the last 5 years. That's because you've been consistently ignoring me. Um, it must be personal, all of those types of things. So there's a lot wrapped up in that scenario that you kind of have to unwrap. Um,
Absolutely.
when the backlog gets so significant that you can't maintain enhancements that matter, that starts to become prohibitive as well, and
Yeah.
starts to make a SaaS-based model more appealing. That
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean that your system is broken at that
Mm-hmm.
point. It simply means that if you are to outsource that function of enhancing your system to a software provider, then those enhancements will come without having to prioritize them on your list. They also will come in an order of priority for your software vendor, not for you. So there's also that piece of the puzzle too.
Absolutely. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So let's go to a few more of these. Do you see anyone you want to tackle?
Not off the top of my head, but I do think that from a perspective of when things stack up and what happens there is a value to saying, look, there's a realism to the. It's time for us to admit that we're not going to get to it as a
Yeah.
company,
Oh, for
right?
sure. Yeah.
Uh,
Absolutely.
and maybe that's a part of the reason that you switch to. Maybe the functionality isn't there because you're just simply not going to get to it. All of
Hmm.
the 1% items are now creating this massive backlog that actually is a differentiator in software. And to knock them all out in one fell swoop is a good thing. There's a value to that. There's also a scenario where the older your system gets, the bigger problem you have with security and security compliances. And a good example isn't necessarily whether or not you need to be compliant with some government regulation, but what about your customers?
Yeah.
Do they need to be compliant with growing government regulations? And are they going to look at you and say, if I got to be compliant, you got to be compliant?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's a problem from a security perspective.
Hmm. For sure. And I think that, that's a big piece. I think that's another piece where we see a lot of overselling because people don't know what they don't know, right? So understanding what are your security risks and what are your like requirements in that is a big piece of going through this discovery
Yeah.
process that we're kind of preaching right now. Is there's lots of different options, roadmaps that you can build, but you got to be careful of who you advise with in those conversations, right? A security consultancy is going to want to sell you security products, right? Does it mean that their advice is terrible and we should throw it away? Absolutely not, right? But it means we need to go in with a level of just understanding what everyone's agenda is in that conversation. And maybe that is the right path for you, right? Maybe it is. Who knows? But it's definitely something that we often see because of this. We have kind of this modernization FOMO, like this fear of missing out, right? And then we also have this fear of not being able to be secure as a modern architecture. And that's a real fear, right? Especially now that we've seen even ransomware attacks or anything like that go into more of the SMB community as opposed to just
Yep.
targeting Coke or Pepsi or something like that, right? And it also, when it comes to compliance, a lot of those kind of duct taped or manual solutions are not accepted anymore, right? When it comes to government regulations, whether it be here in the States or a lot of times we see in the EU, they're even more of a need. So that's definitely a consideration. So let's look at this one here, which I think is a good one. Is the real legacy problem that organizations haven't invested in the people who understand these systems anymore? And what comes to mind is that system that I don't know. So on if you follow me on TikTok, we have a big I hate ServiceNow community. They absolutely despise ServiceNow. And a lot of times we see these types of customized, over customized systems that the people that customize them have now retired or exited the organization. And people don't really understand how that all worked together. So even if it is something where they're like, I don't know if we need new tech or not, but we certainly don't know how this is built. And have you invested in the people to understand like what those look like anymore? So what's your advice in those conversations?
This is a company life cycle conversation at that point, right? Like, where are you in this? Have you been reliant? Do you have a team of 5 IT people who write all your custom code, and they're all in their late 50s to early 60s, right? Maybe the answer is that you've overinvested in those people at this point, right? That could be quite the opposite problem. When we start thinking about investing in the people who understand your systems, part of that is the market and what's
Mm-hmm.
available. Yeah, it's go look for a NetSuite developer. You'll find lots of them, right? That's an easy thing to find. Go look for a COBOL developer, and now you got a problem, right? Folks that are on these legacy systems, they want to retire, and that's
That's
where
a
that
good point.
a
Yeah.
part of this is it comes from, right? And so you become so dependent on them which is fine. That's not to say that you did anything wrong. It just means that now your time's run out, right? You've taken good care of your car. You've gotten a ton of miles on it, and it's done great for you. You've raised a family in it and all this stuff, and now it's dead.
Mm-hmm.
It needs to
Yeah.
be replaced, right?
Yeah.
And there's a problem. That's part of the deal, yeah. So I wouldn't say that it's necessarily a bad thing. Companies have built entire teams around
Mm-hmm.
legacy systems that have brought their company to where it is today, right? But do you have a transition to be undertaken to take you into the future so that you can grow past that? Then that way you don't have this problem where, man, Stu wrote that code back in 1999. And people are like, who is Stu? And you got this one guy in the back corner who's like, oh, you love Stu. He's a great guy to have a beer with. Um, he did some weird stuff in there, though. I've been on writing his code for 10 years. Uh, and somebody's like, who are you? It's like, oh, I've been
Who are
doing
you?
don't mind me. I'm just back here. I'm retiring next month as it is.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, thank you for
So what
that.
are we going to do with all
Appreciate.
those code that you rewrote?
Yeah, like what are we talking about? So,
So I mean, um, it's a resource imbalance, right?
yeah.
How do you say on the front end of software, you do it by getting people who know it and have a passion for it, and When it comes to legacy software systems and replacing them or investing in them, this depends on where you're at. If you're on Great Plains, you probably still got more time, even though Microsoft says they're going to be done with it.
You would tell me to have some decency. So if you follow us over on TikTok, I do these role plays of IT versus the business. It's a big conversation, right? And it totally depends on your organization. But some people will get so mad when in these types of situations. So yesterday, big day for me. I got some TikTok feedback that we now all say there's this comment that's like, have some decency. And I've been in IT for 35 years. And you treat your business customer like, I can't even say the words that they said on the internet here, but now we've just been saying have some decency to each other as a team. Um, throughout this, but that's Stu, right? That like this, I've been doing this for 60 years and blah, blah, blah. And I think a lot of times those people get a bad rap because they're not seen as valuable. I think what they need to be seen as is like, we have a month to get all of that knowledge out of Rick's head in the back of the room before he retires, type of thing. But I had to put this one up there because that's a funny one.
Well, I mean, IT serves the business.
Yeah,
The
absolutely.
business
So you would
now,
totally agree with, that commenter in there. If he had a TikTok, he'd be up in there too, because it is split. We actually did a study on how many people said that it should be IT and how many people said it should be the business based on our comments. But both are going to have to make this type of decision, right? Especially at an enterprise level. And maybe it might be IT that's pushing for all this new tech, right? That happens a lot, right? And then maybe it might be the business coming to IT being like, hey, we need some more trash boards over here. Like we don't have enough type of thing. And IT is like, you know what? You have all of those things. You just have no idea how to use them, right? And that mandatory training that you were too busy to do, that would have been how you reconciled that. So
yeah. And well, I think at the end of the day, your legacy software still runs your business, right?
mhm,
And
absolutely.
it's there's a sense of that can also be does your legacy software provider still offer software,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Now, if they don't, this is a bit of a weird spot to be in, right?
Mhm.
It's well, there's clearly no roadmap for you.
Yeah.
But one of the things that is extraordinarily valuable, and if you start to pile on a couple of facts of life into this, your software vendor wants to keep you as a customer. That is a fact, no
Mhm.
matter what that is. They also want to put you on a SaaS-based licensing service because that's a recurring revenue that is just going to be a set it and forget it for them that they're going to start charging you for immediately. That is also a fact of life. A new software vendor also wants that SaaS-based thing, so they're going to charge you for it right away, and that is also a fact of life. If you buy software from a new provider, your current provider is not is going to see this as a now I got to get as much money out of these people as I can for as long as possible.
Mhm.
So they are going to continue to charge you your maintenance fees until you discontinue them officially. So you're going to pay for both of those until you tell your old vendor we're done with you. We have a process of switching over from an old software to a new software, and it doesn't often happen in whole. It sometimes happens in phases. And so maybe you're paying for both software packages for quite some time. And then you look at your current vendor, your legacy vendor, and they say, "Oh, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, you know, money in this pocket or that pocket doesn't matter to me. I just need money in my pocket. So if you sign with us, we'll just convert your maintenance fees to your subscription. We'll go away
Mhm.
with those, and we'll just keep your subscription fees, and we'll just be done with it."
Mhm.
Now what just happened? Now all that maintenance fees that you were gonna pay to that vendor is gone, and you're not double paying for systems. Now, that doesn't mean that this is the only answer, because sometimes the legacy software that you're on, that you're maintaining, you're paying legacy maintenance fees for, is a system that no longer fits your business, right? And if it doesn't, you've changed business models, you've entered a variety of different markets that you weren't in before, that this software system doesn't serve well. Maybe you used to be a wholesaler, and now you are actually doing your own manufacturing,
Mhm.
right? Your business model is sufficiently changed in that regard. Maybe you were all out of one site, and now you have a global distribution network
Mhm.
that's caused you to need something more extensive. Those are big leaps of
Mhm.
business type that cause you to definitely need a different system. And now you need somebody else. You need a new vendor, because you don't have
Yeah.
your old vendor can't doesn't fit the business that you are today anymore. And there are some of those scenarios as well, right? We
Yeah.
talked a little bit in the beginning of the call about, um, you know, maybe your legacy software system works better than you think it does,
Mhm.
because it does serve your business. And there are examples where strategically it doesn't anymore. And there's a
Mhm.
bit of that goes on too. So it comes back to the, what is my actual problem and how do I
Right.
need to solve it? Because if I can use my legacy technology, or at least my legacy vendor, I can save a lot of money.
Yeah. And I think that's the crux of this conversation. In the fact that you got to be able to go through each one of these things. And I think it's super hard in this type of environment because one, we've got this pressure campaign, right? Whether it be from your legacy vendor or your, a new SaaS vendor, because the minute you call them, right, or even contact them, they are sharks in the marketplace.
Mhm.
And then you've got your internal team where you have to, as a leader of the business, kind of be like, okay, what's the best decision here? Because again, everybody wants something different. Do we have an understanding of how the system works? Do we know how much it costs? And the amount of people that don't actually know that, right? Because it's coming out of a bunch of different budgets and we have to bring all of that together is so, so critical. How much is it costing us to maintain this legacy system that has 600 different customizations and is a big Frankenstein and we couldn't recreate it? Is that going to be more or less? How much does our maintenance cost? How much would it be to go through new SaaS licenses? Not in the first year, right? Because we're, especially right now, if you are in the contract phase on December 5th, they're on your phone every damn day, right? Because they want to close you before the end of the year. And that's a big piece of that conversation, too. So you got to know how much it costs. And a lot of times, that's what we're coming in to help people with because it's so complex to figure all of these things out, right? On one hand, you're unwinding what Stu and Rick are doing in the back of the room, not even from a code perspective, but like how much does that actually cost us in operations expenses to maintain, right? And then also going over to, so and so who's 24 in sales wants this shiny new CRM system because they're going to produce 20% more if they can have, the enterprise tier of HubSpot, right? And
So they
all
say.
of those different things. What?
So they say.
So they say, right? And I know they're salespeople, right? That's what they're supposed to do, right? And that's really a challenging piece to like really, really go through in the fact that what is the best roadmap for you? And I think even going through that process, people want to fast track it, right? We got to get to the next decision. We got to do this. And it's not a fast process. It takes a lot of hard work, discovery, reflection in the business to see where you want to go. It's very easy when you have these types of um, like these types of you do or you don't, right? We have a piece of hardware that quite literally we're going to have to go on Craigslist to find in order to, like, that's easy, right? But you still got to put in the work to figure out what is the next system and how are you going to make that work for you. So that's kind of a big piece on that. um, I want to pick up just on this thread a little bit about ownership. I had one in here. But basically, what we're saying is, do you have more security when you own your legacy system, right? So not so much cyber security, but business security. Do you have more control over that? Is that something that we should consider in that type of thing? And is it a better option than being kind of at the mercy of your SaaS vendor?
I, do you have more ownership? Yes. Is that a good thing? That's the question that I would ask. Can you handle more ownership? Right. Let's actually talk about it from a
Yeah.
cybersecurity perspective. You talk about it from a security business perspective. I think the cybersecurity perspective is actually the better example for this conversation because it makes it clear. Not because it has to be because of cybersecurity, but because it is abundantly clear. Are you an expert in cybersecurity? Does your team have experts in cybersecurity who are going to keep up with all of the AI bots that are now looking for ways to figure out how to get in your system, right? This isn't just people anymore on the other side of the earth who are trying to hack your system. This is people who have created AI bots
Mm-hmm.
who are not only on 24/7, but they are on at a capacity and a level that has been previously unmatched. Are you a cybersecurity expert to the point where you can compete with that? You can keep that out if that looks at you,
Yeah.
or are you willing to take the risk? That's my scenario on it. Right now, if the answer to that is unclear, then I ask, when you start talking to a SaaS based vendor and they say, well, we handle all of the cybersecurity stuff. And if there is something that needs to be taken care of from a cybersecurity perspective, we have a breach, a gap, a vulnerability of some sorts.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just you that has that problem,
Mm-hmm.
everybody does. And now I have a team, a company whose product is supposed to provide this cybersecurity,
Mm-hmm.
who now has a problem that they need to fix for the world, not just for you. And now they have a whole team of resources focused on this because their entire client base is at risk.
Mm-hmm.
That
Absolutely.
is a
Yeah.
better scenario if you do not have your own cybersecurity team of experts.
Right, absolutely. I think that's such a huge consideration in that conversation. So, as we kind of wrap up this conversation, I just want to kind of give our community something they can walk away with, right? So, say you're like in this situation where you're like legacy tech over, SaaS based tech or anything like that. Even if your legacy system is SaaS, how do you start to make this decision in a healthy way? What are like the starting points you would give?
I would start to make a list of your pain points and then start figuring out how you would expect to solve them. Not with the predetermined answer, but what is the best way for us to solve these pain points? I'm unable to grow my business in the way that I want to because I need to create a hub and spoke global distribution model
Mhm.
that I don't currently have today.
Mhm. Yep. That's a
Okay.
great place to start. And even just like full stop, create a list of your pain points, right? Like with no preconceived notion, just make a list. And that's going to be, a big piece of your requirements gathering too, is that, really understanding what that looks like. So going through that exercise as a business
Yep.
without any like we don't know the answer, right? We're just gathering these data points right now is so
And
great.
then look at root cause, right? Why can't I do those things? And not like why can't I do it? Because our system sucks. Well, why does your system suck? Because of this. And why does that? Why is that the case? Get down to a real root cause of it, right? The five whys is an important thing in this. When you start to really dig down into it, why do I think these are problems, and what are they preventing me from being able to do? Answer those questions.
Mhm.
And then once you're done answering those questions, start to think about possible solutions to those
Mhm.
questions. I'm not talking about possible solutions like possible new ERP systems. I'm talking about possible solutions like how do we solve this problem?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Is it with our current system? If we did it with our current system, it would look like this. If we did it with a new system, it would look like this. If we did it with an edge system, it would look like that. If we did it with process change, it would look like this, right? Sometimes process and policy changes are the first place to start. Well, we
Mm-hmm.
have this issue with this, that, and the other because we've got this policy that says we have to do these things in this order. Why does it take me so long to get a purchase order approved? Well, because we've got 10 people that need to have a wet signature. Maybe your
Yeah.
policy is your problem on that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's a huge one, for sure. But well, thank you everyone for joining us today. If you do have more questions on this, because again, it's super complex, lots of layers, and it's very unique to each business, definitely shoot us a message. You can reach us on LinkedIn or Adam at theconfluential.com, Kyler at theconfluential.com. We're always happy, to have these conversations and kind of point you in the right direction. So with that, we will see you next week. Also, if you have something or questions you want us to cover, really we do this and take our time to do this to create value in the community, through showcasing, what is actually happening. Not what do all these people want you to buy, but what should you be doing as a business, and that's our overall mission. So thank you so much for all these great questions. As always, we'll go back in and answer them in the comments as well, share them across platforms. So we appreciate you being here today. Thank you, Adam. And thank you
Mhm.
to the audience. And we'll see you next week.